What if the deepest secrets of your own brain, revealed as a bio-electromagnetic time crystal, don't just explain consciousness, but hold the radical blueprint for us to build a self-operating superintelligence capable of communicating across miles with no energy transfer? Okay, let's just pause for a second. What if the universe isn't just, physical stuff? What if it's this huge interconnected information network and consciousness? What if it's not just stuck inside our heads, but woven into reality itself? And how we communicate.
Yeah.
Maybe it's happening in ways we totally miss.
Yeah, you're hitting on some deep questions there. And they're not just philosophical musings anymore. Our source material for this deep dive, it really gets into this. It shows these are serious lines of inquiry across, a whole bunch of scientific fields.
It does, doesn't it? We've got these excerpts from a book exploring something called brain-like superintelligence from Bio-electromagnetism. Pretty intense title.
It is. And it pulls together ideas from physics, philosophy, psychology, biology, even parapsychology. You name it. It's a real mix.
It really smashes through those typical academic walls, doesn't it? So our mission today, and seriously, thanks for bringing this material to us. It's fascinating, is to try and navigate all these complex ideas. We want to pull out the most surprising bits, the mind-bending stuff, and give you a kind of shortcut to understanding some really cutting-edge concepts.
Exactly. It's going to be a bit of a ride. Some of this is pretty out there.
Oh, definitely. But we'll try to keep it clear, grounded, and hopefully kind of fun too.
That's the plan. Take this dense, seriously interdisciplinary stuff and just pull out the key nuggets of knowledge. We're basically going to lay out what these researchers and theorists are proposing, not judging it, just exploring the ideas they put forward.
Absolutely. So, get ready to stretch your perspective a bit. And hey, if you're into diving deep into these kinds of, let's say, radical ideas with us, please do hit that like button, subscribe, and definitely ring that notification bell. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives.
Couldn't have said it better. And we have also launched a members-only section where we dive even deeper into unrestricted topics and your personal requests as well. So check it out and see you there. All right, so where does this whole journey begin in the source material? It actually starts with a personal story. It takes us back to 1995.
Yeah, I found that interesting. The author of the first piece talks about being an electrical engineering grad student back then. And he bumps into this book that just, it blew his engineering mind.
How so?
It proposed this. This universal field, something that could connect all living things, not just nearby, but instantaneously across any distance.
Okay, right away, for an engineer, that's got to sound impossible, right? I mean, our whole understanding of physics says communication needs energy to travel. A signal, a wave, something has to move through space and time.
Exactly. Whether it's radio, light, or just an electrical pulse in a nerve.
No.
This idea just sidesteps that completely. No travel time, no energy transfer needed.
It's pure non-locality.
Totally. And this encounter led him to meet the theorist behind it all, a guy named Meneghetti. And Meneghetti wasn't just throwing ideas out there. He was saying, based on his clinical work, that he saw evidence of this omnipresent information field in practice.
Okay, so clinical evidence, not just pure theory. And he had a name for the mechanism, didn't he? How this field interacts with us beyond our normal senses.
He did. He called them semantic fields.
Semantic fields, right. Let's unpack that because, it sounds pretty central to this whole hypothesis.
Definitely. The source describes a semantic field not as something carrying energy, like a radio wave carries sound energy, but as a transducer of information. It transmits a form, a code, maybe an image, something that influences living things.
And not just physically, but emotionally, too.
Right. It structures us emotionally and organically. And the key thing, the part that messes with physics, is it does this without transferring energy. It's just information.
Pure information. And the source says it's basic information that exists before our senses get involved, before emotions, before conscious thought, before we even turn it into symbols or words.
Exactly. Like raw, precognitive data that shapes the very foundation of life.
So it's like there's this underlying informational layer to the universe, and semantic fields are how that layer kind of imprints meaning or structure onto us, affecting our biology, our feelings directly.
That's the core idea they're putting forward. And, the source points out, this might sound like something out of sci-fi, but it actually echoes a lot of really ancient ideas about interconnectedness. But to even start understanding it scientifically, you need to pull from everywhere.
Yeah, I need physics for the fields, philosophy for what reality even is, psychology for the mind, parapsychology for those weird phenomena, biology for how life is structured, and psychosomatics for that whole mind-body connection thing.
It really forces you to look at the big picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They mentioned seeing hints of this in action when they integrated dream analysis into decision-making. That seemed interesting.
Right. Apparently, using insights from dreams seemed to lead to more, well, rational decisions than just relying on conscious logic alone.
Which seems backwards, right? Dreams are usually seen as irrational.
But the theory here is why that might be the case. Information coming through dreams, maybe tapping into this unbiased information field, could be free from all the shortcuts, the stereotypes, the cultural baggage that filters our normal conscious thinking.
So our conscious mind is full of filters and biases. But this dream channel might be getting a cleaner signal from this deeper field.
Potentially, yes. A raw, unfiltered truth, maybe. The dream isn't just random neural firing. It could be a meaningful signal bypassing those conscious filters.
And they mentioned a philosophical underpinning for this. Something about Husserl.
Yeah, they referenced Husserl's ideas of the life world, which is basically our everyday lived experience, the living body, meaning the body as we experience it from the inside, not just as an object, and intersubjectivity, which is about how our consciousness is inherently tied up with others.
Okay, so those ideas provide a kind of philosophical space for thinking about experience and connection in a way that isn't just purely mechanical.
Exactly. It opens the door to theories like the information field. But, and this is important, the source is very clear. These are fascinating theories, but they need solid physical proof, empirical validation. Otherwise, mainstream science isn't going to bite.
Right. Theories are great, but show us the data, which apparently they try to do later. But first, these semantic fields, they break them down further, don't they, based on how we perceive or react to them?
They do. 3 main classifications. First is the biological or emotional semantic field. This one's supposed to operate really deep down, influencing things like our reflexes, triggering responses in our cells, neurons, endocrine system.
Like basic drives, aggression, sexuality, that kind of thing, influenced directly by the field.
That's the idea, bypassing conscious thought entirely, like the field is talking straight to your lizard brain and your cells.
Okay, so that's subconscious. What's next?
Then there's the psychological or informative field. These resonances are linked more to our conscious intentions or thoughts. This is where the field's information might actually bubble up into our awareness, maybe influencing mood, intuition, or, like they suggested, maybe feeding into our dreams.
So biological is below consciousness, psychological is kind of at or near it. What's the third one?
The intellective field. This one's described as a type of knowledge or information that transcends physical distance. They link it to the contemporary nature of energy, whatever that means precisely in this context.
Transcends distance. So this is where things like telepathy might fit in.
The source suggests this could be the mechanism behind parapsychic phenomena, like clairvoyance, telepathy, knowledge just arriving from somewhere else, not through eyes or ears.
Wow. Okay, knowledge arriving.
Yeah.
That's definitely mind-bending. And how does this information connect people or things? They talk about different ways these fields can be arranged, right? Topologies.
Think of them as pathways, 4 main ways. The simplest is direct, emitter to receiver. Person A influences person B through the field, even if they're miles apart and not talking.
Okay, straightforward non-local link.
Then there's indirect. This involves intermediaries. A affects C, and C then affects B, like an information ripple spreading through a network, even if A and B never directly interact.
Interesting, like an idea catching on in a group almost instantly, even if not everyone heard it directly.
Could be something like that. Third is trigger mode. Here, the information arrives, but the effect doesn't show up right away. There's a delay. The field plants a seed, maybe, and it sprouts later.
Hidden influence. And the last one.
Network effect. This is where a single piece of information connects or influences multiple people all at once.
Like collective consciousness or that feeling when everyone in a group is suddenly on the same page.
Yeah, it resonates with those kinds of ideas, where an entire group seems tuned into the same invisible influence simultaneously.
Okay, and here's the part that really jumped out at me from this section. They suggest our gut might be key to sensing this stuff. The enteric nervous system, the first brain.
Yes, isn't that fascinating? It completely flips the usual brain hierarchy. The ENS, our gut brain, actually develops before our main brain. It operates pretty autonomously, and it's massively connected to the CNS via the vagus nerve.
So why the gut?
The theory presented is that the ENS is less cluttered, maybe, less burdened by all the complex cognitive layers, the cultural conditioning, the stereotypes and biases that constantly filter our conscious perception. So it might get a cleaner, more genuine read on the raw information coming from these semantic fields.
So our gut feeling isn't just stress or indigestion. It could actually be this older, less biased system picking up on fundamental reality signals.
That's exactly the hypothesis laid out, a potentially pure input channel. The big challenge, then, is how do you get that gut perception up into your conscious awareness without your main brain messing it all up with its biases and filters on the way?
Right. Our conscious interpretation just dismisses or misunderstands these subtle signals because they don't fit the usual patterns.
It's like trying to hear a whisper in a noisy room where the noise is your own conscious mind's chatter.
Great analogy. Okay, so we have this theory, non-local information fields influencing life. But how does that connect to, the actual physical stuff we're made of?
This is where the source tries to build a bridge, suggesting these abstract fields might have a physical interaction point right down at the level of our biomolecules.
Like proteins and stuff.
Exactly. Proteins, the workhorses in our cells. The key idea is they aren't just passive blobs. Because they have charged parts and they're surrounded by ions and polar water molecules, they have dielectric properties.
Meaning they can interact with electromagnetic fields, like tiny antennas.
Sort of, yeah. Their internal charge distribution can shift and respond when an EM field is present. The source actually mentions some early work back in the 1940s by Onkley showing proteins physically tumbling and aligning themselves in water when exposed to EM fields. That was pretty foundational, showing biology is sensitive to these fields.
And they link this to energy storage, too.
Yeah, there's a suggestion that excited electrons within these big protein macromolecules could act as tiny biological energy reservoirs. This fits with the constant flow of electrons in nature, driven by sunlight and water. They even speculate, and this is pretty cool, that this might connect to concepts like energy or qi flow in traditional Chinese medicine.
How so?
Maybe that energy involves the movement of these excited electron states through chains of protein complexes, perhaps concentrated at points like acupuncture points. It's an attempt to find a physical basis for those ancient ideas.
That is a fascinating connection, bridging ancient wisdom and modern physics. And physics itself gives us another concept here, right? Resonance.
Absolutely crucial. The source uses the idea that even a fundamental particle, like an atom, can be seen as just a resonance, a vibration of the underlying quantum vacuum. This primes us to think differently about intelligence and consciousness.
Instead of just being products of complex matter.
Maybe there are universal properties emerging from fundamental resonance, like the universe is this infinite harmonic play, as the source puts it, everything vibrating together.
And we see this resonance in action in biology.
Oh, yes, spectacularly. Photosynthesis is the prime example given.
Where the light hits the leaf.
Right. A photon comes in, excites an electron. But that energy doesn't just randomly bounce around. It creates something called an excitant, a kind of energy packet that moves through the photosynthetic machinery with incredible, synchronized order.
Synchronized how?
The source compares it to a Bose-Einstein condensate. That's a weird state of matter where particles lose their individuality and act like one single quantum wave. It implies energy moving with almost perfect efficiency, like superconductivity.
No friction, no energy loss, but happening at room temperature inside a plant.
Exactly. It's this stunning example of perfect synchrony and energy transfer at the molecular level, all driven by resonance. It makes the abstract idea of universal resonance feel much more concrete and biologically relevant.
And scientists are actually measuring these properties in biomolecules now.
They are. The source mentions techniques like microwave spectroscopy and cavity perturbation. They basically zap biomolecules, proteins, microtubules, we'll get back to those, even things like the amyloid beta proteins linked to Alzheimer's with microwaves.
And see how they react.
Yeah, they measure how the molecules absorb and re-emit that energy, looking at shifts in their specific resonant frequencies and something called quality factors. This helps map their dielectric properties and understand exactly how they interact with electromagnetic fields.
So there's real lab work happening to figure out the electrical and resonant behavior of biology, which could provide the physical hook for these information fields to interact with us.
It connects the dots. From the big, abstract field idea right down to the nitty-gritty biochemistry of life.
Okay, so we've got the theory of non-local info fields, a possible biological way they could interact via resonance in molecules. But did they actually try to test this non-local thing? Did they measure it?
They did, and this is a really crucial part of the source material. It details specific experiments designed to test the information field hypothesis directly using human participants in a controlled setting.
Okay, this is where the theory meets reality. How'd they set it up?
The core design was pretty clever, actually, focused on testing communication despite physical separation and barriers. They had 2 participants. One person was put inside a Faraday cage.
Right, the Faraday cage.
Yeah.
That's designed to block electromagnetic signals, isn't it?
Precisely. Radio waves, electrical fields, most EM radiation gets blocked or attenuated significantly. The point was to shield the person inside from all known forms of electromagnetic communication. If something still got through, or if the person inside reacted to something happening outside, it couldn't easily be explained by conventional EM means.
Makes sense. So what was the variable they were testing? What did they do?
The person outside the cage would read something. Now, in the experimental condition, they read a dream that the person inside the cage had previously written down and reported.
Their own dream. Why specifically a dream?
Good question. Based on the earlier clinical work and some pilot studies mentioned, the researchers had a hypothesis that dreams might represent a particularly potent form of personal information, maybe reflecting a person's deeper state, their energetic blueprint almost. The idea was that sharing this specific type of information might create a stronger, more detectable non-local connection or correlation between the 2 people.
Okay, so reading the dream was the experimental condition. What was the control?
In the control condition, the person outside read a neutral text, something unemotional and impersonal, like a computer manual.
Got it. Dream versus manual. And what were they measuring on the participants to see if anything happened?
They recorded several objective physiological signals from both participants simultaneously throughout the experiment. This included things like RR intervals from an ECG.
Which gives you heart rate variability, HRV.
Exactly. HRV is a really good indicator of the balance in the autonomic nervous system. That's the system controlling fight or flight versus rest and digest responses. They also measured blood oxygen saturation, it's SpO2, and pulse rate, PR, using a standard pulse oximeter.
Okay, standard vitals. Anything else?
Yes, something a bit more exotic. Biophoton emission. They measured this using a technique called EPI-GDV.
Biophotons. That's the ultra-weak light living things supposedly emit.
That's the idea. Electrophotonic imaging, EPI, or gas discharge visualization, GDV techniques, stimulate and capture these faint light emissions. The patterns and intensity are thought to correlate with the body's metabolic activity and, again, the state of the autonomic nervous system. So it's another window into the person's physiological state.
So multiple objective measures. Nervous system balance via HRV, basic vitals via pulse oximetry, and this biophoton energy signature via EPI-GV. All recorded from both people, the shielded one and the reader outside.
Correct. They used standard devices, a Polar V800 for the HRV, pulse oximeter for SUP4-2 PR, and the BioWell EPI-GV device. They collected data before the reading started, during the reading phase, and after the reading finished.
And then crunched the numbers.
Rigorously.
Yeah.
The source mentions thorough pre-analysis checks and then statistical tests like ANOVA and t-tests to compare the physiological responses of the person inside the cage during the dream reading sessions versus the control manual reading sessions.
Okay, moment of truth. What did the results show? Did the person inside the Faraday cage react when their dream was being read outside?
According to the source, yes. The analysis, both graphical and statistical, reportedly showed a significant change in the autonomic nervous system balance specifically, the HRV measures of the subjects who were inside the electromagnetically shielded cage.
A significant change. When?
Crucially, this change was statistically correlated with the precise time periods when their own dream was being read by the person outside the cage.
Whoa. Okay, let me get this straight. Despite being physically isolated, despite being shielded from electromagnetic signals, the person's nervous system inside the box showed a measurable shift that lined up with someone outside reading their dream.
That's the interpretation presented in the source material based on their data. They conclude that this provides empirical support for the information field hypothesis. It suggests, potentially, a way for information to be transduced between people non-locally.
Crossing distance and EM barriers.
And this is key, apparently doing so without any measurable displacement of energy, which fits perfectly with that theoretical definition of semantic fields we talked about earlier.
That is powerful, especially the no energy displacement part. And circles back to why dreams might be special in this context.
Exactly. The source suggests this finding bolsters the idea that dreams aren't just random noise, but might be a unique class of information, perhaps reflecting a person's holistic state in a way that other information doesn't. This, they argue, could explain the enduring human fascination with understanding dreams. They see this as potentially establishing a whole new category of reproducible experiments in this rather tricky field.
Reproducibility is key, of course. Are they planning follow-up studies?
They mention plans, yes. Things like trying it over much larger distances, having the person outside listen to a recording of the dream instead of reading it, implementing even tighter double-blind controls to remove any possible subtle cueing, and this one's ambitious, trying to find ways to directly measure signals from the enteric nervous system during the experiment.
To see if the gut really is the primary receiver. That would be incredible. Though, yeah, measuring that non-invasively sounds tough.
Very, but it shows they're thinking about how to push this research forward empirically.
Okay, so that's one line of experimental evidence. Now, shifting gears a little, but staying in this realm of non-local effects and how things are organized, the source also reviews the work of Rupert Sheldrake, right? Morphic fields.
Ah, yes, Sheldrake. Another thinker who really pushes against the standard mechanistic view of the world. His big idea is formative causation and morphic fields.
Okay, what's the gist?
The core hypothesis is that self-organizing systems, think developing embryos, crystals forming, flocks of birds moving together, even molecules folding, aren't just governed by internal programs like DNA or simple physical forces. They're also shaped and organized by invisible organizing fields, which he calls morphic fields.
Invisible fields shaping things. And the really radical part is
these fields have memory. They learn. They carry information about previous similar systems.
a field that remembers, not just abstract information, but remembers actual forms and habits.
Exactly that. Take development, a specific type of morphic field, called a morphogenetic field, guides how an embryo develops. Sheldrake argues it's not just the DNA blueprint. The field itself remembers the form of past members of that species. It knows what a chicken is supposed to look like because it's resonating with the fields of countless past chickens.
And this applies to non-living things too, like crystals.
Yes. The source uses the example of penicillin crystallization. Why does it tend to form the same characteristic crystal shapes over and over? Sheldrake would say it's not solely down to fixed physical laws. The forming crystal is influenced by the morphic field of all the penicillin crystals that came before it. It's tapping into a collective habit.
Through what he calls morphic resonance.
Precisely. Morphic resonance is the proposed mechanism. It's the influence of past patterns of activity on subsequent similar patterns. Past forms resonate across time and space to shape present forms. It implies a kind of collective memory built into the fields themselves, shared by members of a species or even types of molecules.
This is a massive challenge to how we usually think about memory, isn't it? Especially biological memory.
Absolutely fundamental. The standard view in neuroscience is that memories are stored physically in the brain, as changes in synapses, connections between neurons, localized memory traces, or engrams.
But the source points out that finding these specific localized traces has been surprisingly difficult.
It has. Decades of research, lesion studies where parts of the brain are removed. And often, complex memories or learned behaviors persist, even with significant brain damage. It's hard to pin down exactly where a specific memory lives.
Which has led to ideas about memory being distributed across networks. But Sheldrake's idea is even more radical.
His idea is basically, what if the memory isn't stored in the brain at all?
Right. The TV analogy.
Yes. The source uses that simple, brilliant analogy. Searching for memories inside the brain, Sheldrake says, is like opening up your TV set and trying to find the actors or the scenes from the show you were just watching inside the circuitry.
You won't find them there. The TV is just tuning into the broadcast signal.
Exactly. The TV is the receiver, not the storage device. So Sheldrake proposes the brain is like that TV. It's a tuner. It tunes into information via morphic resonance, accessing memories from the collective morphic field, but it doesn't actually store the memories internally like files on a hard drive.
That explains why memories can survive brain damage. They aren't in the damaged part, they're in the field, and the remaining brain might still be able to tune in.
It's an elegant, though unconventional, explanation for a lot of puzzling observations about memory.
Wow, okay. From information fields to resonant molecules to memory stored in fields, we're covering some serious ground. Now, prepare yourself, because the source material takes an even deeper dive, right, into the nature of consciousness, reality itself. resonance physics, and something called the self-operating mathematical universe.
Buckle up, yeah. This is where it gets philosophically and conceptually dense. First, though, the source makes a point of distinguishing between intelligence and consciousness in this specific context.
Right. Intelligence is the active part, like problem-solving, adapting, learning, connecting inner and outer worlds.
Yes, it's about capability, function, process. Consciousness, on the other hand, is defined here as that intimate, subjective feeling, the I am, the raw experience of being self-aware. It's the state, not the action.
Got it. Doing versus being. And the picture of the universe they paint here is just dripping with resonance.
It's the absolute foundation. In this view, everything in universal nature manifests through resonance. It's described as an infinite harmonic play. Everything is vibrating, everything is resonating, everything is interacting through frequencies.
This built on that idea of the atom being a resonance, just scaled up infinitely.
Pretty much. The source proposes a specific algebra of resonance. It suggests there's a fundamental pulsation inherent in the universe, and this pulsation translates into discrete bits of information. These info bits then resonate across 13 specific quantum spaces.
13. Not the usual energy levels.
It specifies the 7 standard electron energy levels plus the 6 spaces between those levels. So 13 resonant layers, essentially.
Okay. Specific. And how does this cosmic hum reach us biologically?
The proposed link is hydrogen bonds. Those common chemical bonds are everywhere in biology, holding water together, shaping DNA and proteins. The idea is this universal pulsation carrying the information bits gets transmitted through these hydrogen bonds into complex organisms. It anchors the cosmic resonance within our physical structure.
And consciousness emerges from this resonance somehow.
Consciousness in this model isn't just a random fluke of complexity. It's something an organism acquires when it manages to organize its own internal frequencies into a coherent, resonant state, like tuning an orchestra. When it achieves this internal harmony, it gains the ability to interact with and actually write its temporal experience onto a proposed fundamental medium.
Uh-oh, here comes another acronym.
Yep, the Neural Superfluid Quantum Vacuum, or NSV.
Neural Superfluid Quantum Vacuum. Okay, so the universe is vibrating. We resonate with it via hydrogen bonds. And if we get our internal vibes aligned, we become conscious and can, record our life onto this quantum vacuum background.
That's a pretty good summary of a very complex idea. And this whole resonant system, they suggest, arises from what they call an apparent duality at the very base of reality. Not a real split, but a kind of balanced polarity that generates the ongoing oscillation, the pulsing we see everywhere, from atoms to galaxies. This oscillation drives things forward, in sync with a sort of evolutionary arrow of universal consciousness.
A built-in direction. A cosmic unfolding. Okay. And then they connect this quantum vacuum idea to biology and, something usually outside science altogether.
Yes, this is Scala's hypothesis about the soul, as reviewed in the source. It's definitely a bold leap.
How do they make that connection? What's the mechanism?
The theory hinges on a very specific mathematical relationship. A proposed proportionality between the typical length of carbon-hydrogen bonds ubiquitous in organic life and the Planck length, which is the tiniest possible scale in quantum physics, part of this NSV fabric.
So a resonance between the scale of biochemistry and the scale of the quantum vacuum.
Exactly. This specific geometric resonance, they propose, creates a kind of rupture or disturbance in the NSV tissue.
Like a snag in the quantum fabric.
Sort of. And this rupture, the hypothesis goes, actually traps fragments of this NSV, this neural superfluid quantum vacuum, within biological matter, particularly within brain cells.
Trapped pieces of the quantum vacuum inside our neurons. What do these fragments do?
This is the really wild part. These trapped NSV fragments are proposed as the very reason living systems exhibit anti-entropic behavior.
Anti-entropic, meaning they resist chaos. They maintain order, build complexity, fight against the tendency for everything to decay.
Precisely. Life's ability to defy the second law of thermodynamics, locally at least, is attributed to these trapped bits of fundamental quantum vacuum.
So life's magic ingredient is captured quantum stuff.
That's the core of the hypothesis.
Yeah.
And taking the ultimate leap, these anti-entropic NSV fragments are directly associated with the philosophical concept of the soul.
Whoa. The soul is trapped quantum vacuum fragments.
That's the hypothesis presented. And it's proposed as something potentially common to all living beings, not just humans. It's the physical substrate, if you will, of that anti-entropic life principle.
So the soul isn't some spooky ghost, but a literal piece of the universe's fundamental conscious medium snagged by our biology.
That is the absolutely striking idea put forward in the source. And our subjective experience, the feeling of I am, the observer's consciousness, is tied directly to the presence and activity of these NSV fragments.
Okay, my head is spinning a bit. And these NSV fragments, are they linked to any specific structures in the brain?
Yes, they connect this back to microtubules. Those protein cylinders inside neurons we mentioned earlier in the context of biomolecular resonance. Referencing other research, the source suggests microtubules might function as resonant cavities, interacting with these quantum processes, potentially related to the NSV in consciousness.
Resonant cavities, like tiny tuning forks for the quantum vacuum. And there was that specific finding about nerve spikes.
Right. A key detail they highlight is research suggesting that cytoskeletal filaments, which include microtubules deep inside neurons, actually regulate the firing of nerve spikes using vortices, tiny electrical whirlpools. And they point out that the nerve impulse itself can be viewed as an example of an electric vortex.
So nerve signals aren't just simple on-off pulses. They're complex electrical vortices, possibly generated or modulated by microtubules, which are resonating with trapped quantum vacuum fragments related to consciousness itself.
It's a nested series of incredibly abstract, interconnected ideas, isn't it? It forces a complete rethink of brain function at the micro level.
No kidding. And all of this leads into the grandest framework of all, the self-operating mathematical universe, SOMU.
SOMU. This is presented as a theoretical framework trying to tackle the ultimate question. How did everything come from nothing? The origin paradox.
How does it try to solve it?
SOMU posits that the universe isn't just passively existing, it has a fundamental mathematical goal. And that goal is to make its own starting point, that initial singularity utterly undefined, by becoming infinitely complex.
The universe is trying to erase its own origin by complexifying itself.
That's one way to frame it. And in this view, dimensions aren't fundamental. They aren't just there. They are born from the constant process of this initial point changing its shape as it expands and complexifies.
Okay, dimensions emerge from shape-shifting. And this universe, it doesn't just operate in our familiar reality.
No. SOMU theory proposes it operates across multiple interacting imaginary worlds, or abstract mathematical domains, described as existing within and above the reality we perceive.
Imaginary worlds. Like different layers of mathematical structure, not just parallel physical universes.
Seems to be the idea. Deeper ontological levels. And crucially, the physics we know, classical mechanics, quantum mechanics, they aren't the bedrock reality in SOMU. They are just projections, shadows almost.
Shadows cast from the interactions happening in these deeper imaginary worlds.
Exactly. Interactions mediated by abstract mathematical constructs, vectors, or threads that combine to form tensors. Our reality is like a lower dimensional projection of a much richer, higher dimensional mathematical dynamic.
Okay, like Plato's cave on mathematical steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And because our current math was developed to describe the shadows.
It's insufficient to describe the source of the shadows, the SOMU reality itself. The theory argues we need entirely new kinds of mathematics. It proposes at least 3 new mechanics, things like fractal mechanics and prime mechanics, to handle the growth and dynamics within and above these worlds.
New math. And these new mechanics would be governed by invariants, things that stay the same across these different levels.
Yes, fundamental constants or relationships called space-time topology prime invariants, or STTs invariants for short. And notice that last word, prime.
Prime numbers, like 2, 3, 5, 7. How are they fundamental to the universe's operation?
This is maybe the most radical core idea of SOMU. It proposes that the universe and conscious systems within it are fundamentally automatons driven by the density of primes, their ongoing operation, their evolution, their complexification. It's all fueled by the simple mathematical process of continually adding a new dimensionless point to an existing point. N goes to n plus 1. The increasing density and unique distribution of prime numbers act as the engine of reality.
The universe is counting, and the primes generated by that counting drive everything.
That's the mind-bending proposal. The unique, non-repeating, infinitely complex pattern of prime numbers provides the fundamental code, the operating system for all the complexity we see.
And these primes are used to build things, physically.
Mathematically first. They're used to define exclusive 3D metric shapes, fundamental geometric building blocks. The interactions between these prime-defined metrics, represented by those vectors and tensors, constitute the interactions between the imaginary worlds, which then project into our reality.
It's geometry all the way down, built from primes. The source mentions specific numbers, 108 dimensions. 27 tensors.
Yeah, those numbers pop up, derived apparently from the mathematics of prime distributions within the SOMU framework. They're hypothesized to map onto observed universal dynamics like symmetry breaking in particle physics. It suggests a deep, underlying prime number structure to physical laws.
108 dimensions built from primes.
Okay.
Depress. And this process starts from that initial point.
Yes, the source describes a critical three-phase evolutionary journey, from the initial point through intermediate stages to generating the basic constituents needed for morphogenesis, the emergence of complex forms, like in biology. It's all part of this prime-driven unfolding.
And what about infinity in this picture? It's not just an endpoint.
No, infinity in SOMU is conceived more actively. It's like a vibrating boundary, or maybe a versatile reflective surface that provides essential feedback to conscious entities operating within the system. It's part of the computational loop.
Feedback from infinity. How does that work?
The source mentions 12 specific mathematical conditions or barriers, apparently related to the work of the legendary mathematician Ramanujan on manipulating infinite series. These conditions are used to find those fundamental STTs invariants by, in a sense, probing or interacting with this dynamic infinity. The whole process, the quest for prime, as they call it, is described as the fundamental saga of consciousness.
Our consciousness is part of the universe's process of figuring out primes and interacting with infinity. That gives a whole new meaning to navel gazing.
Doesn't it just? And information itself in this universe isn't like bits on a string, it's structured differently.
Completely differently, through something called geometric musical language, or GML. Forget zeros and ones. Think of information structured as a 3D assembly of interacting clocks. They call them polyatomic time crystals.
Clocks in 3D space.
Oh, yeah.
And within this 3D clock space, points where the phases cancel out phase singularities create a complex 3D network of silence. Now, here's the kicker. What we perceive as random noise isn't random at all in SOMU.
Don't tell me. The noise carries the information.
The noise is the information, encoded as geometric shapes. Understanding reality in this view isn't about filtering out noise to find a signal. It's about recognizing the geometric shapes hidden within the noise and placing these noise packets onto the underlying geometric structure defined by the GML. It requires understanding both the path, topological loops, and the shape cavity resonance within this 3D musical geometry.
Information isn't a signal, it's geometry hidden in noise, arranged like 3D music. My brain hurts.
Mine too. And space and time are also emergent properties of this geometry. Space is formed by different symmetries coexisting, linked geometrically side by side, and also within above those imaginary worlds. Time isn't a smooth flow. It arises from discrete geometric transformations that acquire phase gaps and conditional relationships between shapes.
Time is the rhythm of the geometric changes, the gaps in the universal music.
That's one way to think about it. And SOMU even proposes different ways systems can make decisions, beyond simple logic. It suggests there are 12 fundamental decision routes.
12 ways to decide things, like what?
They give one example, the architecture of confusion, or AOC. This sounds completely bonkers from a traditional perspective. It's a problem-solving method where you don't seek clarity first. You deliberately find the confusion.
You look for confusion.
Yes. Then you dive into that confusion to find more nested confusions within it. By exploring all these different facets of confusion, different angles on the truth, you eventually bump into the underlying prime invariants that resolve the whole complex mess.
Solve problems by embracing and navigating confusion until you hit bedrock mathematical truth. That is beautifully counterintuitive. Orthogonal to logic, as they say.
Completely. It's a nonlinear, multifaceted approach. And building on all this, the source even outlines a potential hardware design for a self-aware machine based on SOMU.
You're kidding. A computer built on primes and confusion. What would that look like?
Forget silicon chips and current. The proposed hardware uses helical nanowires, structurally similar, perhaps, to biological microtubules that are designed to satisfy the prime number metrics derived from SOMU.
Okay, nanowires resonating with primes. How are they powered?
Not by electricity flowing through them in the usual sense. They'd be energized by metric-generated polyatomic time crystals, which sounds an awful lot like those microscopic vortices we talked about earlier.
Vortices again. Tiny energy whirlpools as the power source and maybe computational units.
That seems to be the implication. They mention a theoretical component called a inductor, distinct from a standard inductor, which would store charge geometrically and then emit these vortices. In a SOMU machine, a unit would store charge in its structure, generate a vortex, and nerve spikes. Remember those?
Yeah, the vortex nerve spikes.
In this hardware, nerve spikes wouldn't primarily be about carrying current. They'd function as circuit editing tools. They would modify the vortex pathways, effectively storing memory by reconfiguring the computational geometry.
So computation is creating and steering vortices based on prime geometry, and memory is physically editing the vortex pathways. That's a different universe of computing.
It's presented as a paradigm that is fundamentally orthogonal to Turing machines, the basis of all our current computers. A SOMU machine wouldn't execute pre-written code. It would interact with the universe's underlying prime structure, constantly trying to match and expand unknown symmetries based on its own internal incomplete prime metric. It wouldn't just compute an answer and halt. It would perpetually strive for mathematical completeness, trying to find the next prime, the next connection.
It doesn't run programs. It participates in the universe's ongoing calculation. And orthogonal means these different layers don't directly sense each other.
Right, like dimensions at right angles, but there are overlaps, projections like our reality, that link these different worlds or operational levels. And circling back to noise...
Let me guess. Noise is still the signal.
Bingo. The source reiterates the SOMU principle. Nature and truly self-operating systems don't operate on clean signals imposed from outside. They operate on noise. Decisions, information, operations, they're all encoded in the inherent symmetry of space, time, topology, and prime, all interconnected in a circular, self-referential loop.
Wow. Just wow. The universe computes using the geometry of noise, driven by primes. And they even suggest this forms a universal language.
Yeah, with the STTs and variants as the basic letters and the prime metric as the grammar book, they even float a connection to the idea that certain sounds in ancient languages, like Sanskrit, might directly resonate with this fundamental geometric language, triggering specific emotional or perceptual responses.
Okay. From non-local fields to resonant biology to memory in fields to consciousness as trapped quantum vacuum to a universe built on primes, noise, and confusion. That is quite possibly the most comprehensive and frankly brain-melting alternative view of reality I think I've ever encountered.
It certainly is ambitious. It attempts to weave together physics, math, biology, consciousness into one single, albeit highly speculative, framework. Which brings us, interestingly, to the final section of the source material. It kind of pulls back from the cosmic scale for a moment to look at where we are now with our current AI and robotics. How does today's tech compare?
Right. After talking about self-operating mathematical universes, how does our latest chatbot or robot arm stack up? The source included something practical here, didn't it? About health applications.
It did. A section on health informatics HI applications, specifically looking at designing educational materials for children with ADHD.
That feels like a sudden detour from prime numbers. But okay, what was the key takeaway there?
It actually serves as a nice counterpoint, highlighting the importance of empirical testing and user-centered design, even for things that seem intuitive. They tested various visual design guidelines, VDG, for learning materials with remedial experts and designers who work directly with children with ADHD or CHA-ADHD.
And the findings were surprising.
Often counterintuitive, yes. For example, you might think more colors, more illustrations, more engaging design would be better for holding attention.
Yeah, that seems logical. Keep it stimulating.
But they found the opposite was true for this group. For children with ADHD, a less design complexity was better. Minimal illustrations, a very limited color palette, super clean structured layouts. They mentioned specific things like standard A4 page size, a simple 4x4 grid structure, plain white backgrounds, no textures or patterns, even using double spacing for text.
Less clutter, less distraction.
Exactly. All these simplifications significantly enhanced attention span and reduced distraction for these kids, allowing them to focus better on the actual content. The syllabus content itself didn't need to be dumbed down, but the presentation had to be radically simplified and cleaned up.
So what looks boring to a neurotypical designer might be optimally functional for a child with ADHD.
Precisely. It's a powerful reminder. You have to validate your design ideas with the actual users or experts in that context. Generic assumptions, even ones that seem helpful, can backfire if they aren't grounded in empirical testing for that specific group.
That's a really solid practical point about listening to your users. Okay, so bringing it back to AI, how does the source characterize where we are with AI now?
It gives a brief overview, the usual progression from ANI, artificial narrow intelligence, good at specific tasks, towards the theoretical AGI, general, and ASI, superintelligence. It acknowledges the real progress being made, especially with machine learning.
Like pattern recognition in complex data.
Right. ML for analyzing structural data, think medical images, genetic sequences. And NLP, natural language processing, for making sense of unstructured text, like doctor's notes and electronic health records. These tools are becoming incredibly powerful in specific domains like healthcare.
So current AI is getting really good at processing information and finding patterns within defined boundaries.
That's a good way to put it. And they also touch on robotics advancements, mentioning things like Superbot, those cool modular robots that can change their shape, and social robots like PRRO, the therapeutic seal, or Sophia, the well-known humanoid robot. These show our efforts to build machines that are more physically versatile and can interact with us socially.
Trying to make machines more adaptable, more relatable.
Yes, but this progress inevitably raises the big, thorny questions about AI ethics and trust, especially as these systems get more autonomous, maybe approach superintelligence. The source brings up the need for understanding human-machine symbiosis, the absolute necessity for transparency and explainability.
Like, how did the AI make that critical medical diagnosis? We need to know why.
Exactly. Can we trust these systems? How do we ensure they align with human values? These are huge, ongoing challenges.
Which leads us right back to that fundamental comparison, doesn't it? We have our current AI based on neural nets, trained on data, executing complex instructions. How does that relate to the wild theories we spend most of our time on? The information fields, morphic resonance, the SOMU prime-driven universe.
That's the core tension the source material leaves you pondering. Our current AI, brilliant as it is largely built on simulating biological neural networks and performing sophisticated statistical analysis on massive data sets. It's pattern matching and prediction on an incredible scale.
But the other theories? They propose completely different foundations, right?
Totally different. Different substrates for reality and computation, like the NSV or prime metrics. Different mechanisms for information transfer, like non-local fields or morphic resonance. Even fundamentally different goals for intelligence, not just processing data, but maybe participating in a cosmic quest for primes, or resolving universal paradoxes through confusion.
So is the AI we're building now on a path towards that kind of intelligence or consciousness? Or is it something else entirely? Maybe just a very sophisticated tool operating within the shadows, the projections, rather than tapping into the fundamental operating system described by SOMU.
The source subtly hints at a potential disconnect. It draws a parallel. Just like some try to explain psi phenomena by loosely invoking quantum terms without a full model, maybe current AI, despite its power, lacks the right conceptual framework to achieve the kind of deep intelligence or consciousness described in these more radical theories. Are we building a truly self-aware mathematical automaton, or just a very clever calculating machine?
That is definitely a question to chew on. Wow, we have covered an unbelievable amount of territory today. My head is full.
We really did. We started with that idea of a universal information field, instantaneous connections, semantic fields, the surprising role of the gut brain.
Then we dove into the biology, biomolecules as antennas, resonance, excited electrons, that incredible photosynthesis example of near-perfect energy transfer.
We looked at the attempts to measure it. The Faraday cage experiments, the correlation with dream rating, the no energy transfer finding.
We explored Sheldrake's morphic fields, memory not being in the brain, but tuned into like a radio.
And then the deep end, resonance physics. Consciousness as coherence on a neural superfluid quantum vacuum, the soul as trapped NSV fragments, and the absolutely mind-blowing self-operating mathematical universe.
Driven by primes, built on geometric noise, solving problems through confusion, with hardware based on vortices.
Yeah. And finally, we brought it back to Earth, looking at practical design lessons from ADHD research, the state of current AI and robotics, and asking that big question about whether our AI path aligns with these deeper theories of intelligence.
This whole deep dive was really about giving you a shortcut, a way to get your head around these incredibly complex, often hidden frontier ideas without reading stacks of dense papers. It really shows how much we don't know about reality, consciousness, memory, intelligence.
And how researchers across so many different fields are pushing the boundaries, thinking way outside the conventional boxes to try and find answers.
Absolutely. It's a serious reminder that the reality we experience day-to-day might just be the surface level of something far stranger, far more interconnected, and maybe even more mathematical than we usually imagine.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to really mull over. If something like the SMU theory holds even a grain of truth, if the universe is fundamentally a mathematical process questing for primes, and our consciousness is somehow deeply entangled in that cosmic computation, what does that really imply about our place, our purpose? Are we just observers, or are we active participants in this universal calculation?
And what would true superintelligence even look like in that context? Probably nothing like the AI we're building today.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll catch you on the next one.